good location. We have chairs for anybody like me who needs it. Hey there. And if you could come down here and kind of make a semicircle around me, I want to leave some room. Maybe I'll take a few more steps. I want to leave some room for people to get around behind us, so if you folks can gather in right here. I'm going to stay here for a good 5-10 minutes. I want the little one to be right up front if you want to. If you can't hear at any time, you come right up front, and I'll knock you over with this microphone. So, World War I. Anybody know what year World War I started? Very good, 1914 in Europe. The air war in World War I was a learning process for aviation. The airplane did not play a big role in the outcome of the First World War, but the role of the airplane was decided during the First World War. Our curators refer to that war, the Great War, as the adolescence of aviation. First airplane I want to talk about from the First World War is the green one hanging up above us, a French-built single-seat Newport 28. Not a very remarkable aircraft. The French were actually not that interested in the airplane once Newport built them and sold many of them to the United States. We trained many of our pilots in the Newport. It was good for training. It wasn't really a great aircraft for combat. It had, for an engine, a rotary engine. And that means the entire engine turned with the propeller. It wasn't really an efficient way to propel an airplane, kept the engine nice and cool, and really wasn't used much after the First World War. Notice the blunt end on the aircraft. That was to deflect the castor oil. Instead of a motor oil, they used castor oil in the engines. And the castor oil would splatter into the pilot's face. So they used that round cowling around the engine to deflect some of that castor oil. No one in this group is as old as I am, and you probably don't know the effects of castor oil on the intestines, and it's not pleasant. Let me just tell you, it's not pleasant. So the flashy scarves that you see the pilots in World War I wearing, that was to keep their goggles clean. That wasn't a fashion statement. The significance of the Newport 28 is the hat in the ring insignia. That, of course, is Uncle Sam's hat. America is throwing their hat into the ring. They're finally entering the war in 1917. And the hat in the ring insignia is the insignia of the 94th Fighter Squadron. It was the first airplane to carry the colors of the United States in the First World War. And the 94th Fighter Squadron's perhaps most famous aviator was Eddie Rickenbacker, and that's his uniform right here. Rickenbacker was the top ace for the United States in the First World War. I think he had 25 victories. So that was the significance of the Newport 28. Again, a single-seat fighter aircraft. On the floor, on my left, on your right, is a German aircraft. You can tell by that Iron Cross emblem on it. A German Halberstadt Cl. This is a twin-engine ground attack airplane. The fella sitting in the rear seat would have a bucket of little bombs and little grenades that he would toss over the side on unsuspecting troops down below him. Notice the nose of the aircraft is somewhat more streamlined, tapered than the blunt end on the Newport. This is an inline Mercedes engine. The pistons were in line with one another, which required a radiator and water cooling. That Halberstadt was one of the most effective ground attack airplanes in the entire Great War. Behind me, another French-built airplane, the SPAD 16. This is a twin-seat reconnaissance airplane. Another role that the airplane has in aviation in wartime. This time reconnaissance, taking pictures, observing the enemy. This was a offshoot of a single-seat SPAD. There was the SPAD 7 and the SPAD 13. Had a single seat, the SPAD 16, a two-seat. Anybody know what that little propeller might be for? This one right here. They have a venture, we'll guess. You think it's a backup engine? In case this one fails, you got a little engine there to measure speed. It is actually a rapid air turbine, and it's a generator powered by the turning propeller as it flows through the air, and it powered an onboard radio. There's right back here, can you see this little weight? Looks like a fish.
Yes.
That's the end of the antenna. And the fellow sitting in the rear seat would reel out that antenna to the designated length, giving the frequency of the radio, and they could communicate with the ground real time. One of the first airplanes to ever have an onboard radio. The significance of this airplane is this is the actual personal airplane of Brigadier General Billy Mitchell. Mitchell's statue is right here. That's really Billy Mitchell's statue gazing out over the museum. Mitchell was the commanding general of all forward air units for the United States in the First World War. He was the first American to fly over enemy lines. And in 1918, November of 1918, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for valor for making multiple missions over enemy lines during a major ground offensive. The story for Billy Mitchell doesn't get any better than that, because after the war, he was a very outspoken, very strong proponent of air power. Some would say a little bit too outspoken. And by 1926, this war hero was court-martialed by the U.S. Army Air Service for insubordination. He complained particularly about the Navy so much the Army finally had to do something, and they court-martialed him. He retired to his home in Middleburg, Virginia, which is not very far from here, right out Route 50, the road that is just south of our hangar. And he stayed out of the public eye for the rest of his life. However, Mitchell was not forgotten. In the build-up to the Second World War, the B-25 bomber was named Mitchell in his honor. And by the time he got to the Second World War, his ideas about aviation and military aviation all came to pass. The Newport, the Spad, and the Halberstadt are examples of a complete restoration. These airplanes are beautifully, meticulously restored, probably to the way they looked the day they rolled off the assembly line. This is not what we're doing in the future. In the future, we're doing something a step below. We call it conservation, and if you follow me to this airplane, I'll explain conservation.
It must be too expensive to...
You stay here, you have to do the tour. So this is another French-built airplane. This is the Cadron G4, twin engine. This one is a bomber. Can you see that little piece of plywood under there? The bomber sits in the front and he dropped the bomb between his legs through that little piece of plastic. I believe it's the oldest military airplane in our entire collection. Certainly the oldest twin-engine airplane in our collection. This airplane, almost all of it is original. We've done as little as possible to keep it historically significant and intact. The wings, the fabric on these wings is almost all original. The paint is almost all original. These other airplanes have been completely repainted. All original paint. The engines have been restored. When an engine sits in a farmhouse or a barn for 50 years, it can get pretty ratty. We've had rat nests, bird nests, squirrel nests. That's enough. One of the propellers is an original and one is a reproduction. Anybody want to take a stab at which is which? Look at you. Yeah, very good. This is the original. And the only way I can tell is I have to look at the decal, because this decal is a little bit faded and this one is a little bit sharper. We actually found someone who could replicate the decal. There are only 2 Cadrons left in the world. You're looking at one of them right now. The other one is in Paris. So as I said, the airplane did not have a big role in the outcome of the First World War. But when we get around to the Second World War, we'll see the airplane had a much larger role in the outcome of that war. Let's talk about the birth of aviation. Make sure I got the right picture. Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, December 17th, 1903. These are neighbors of yours. These boys are from Ohio. The Wright brothers make aviation history. This is Wilbur. He's running alongside. Orville is flying the airplane. The flight only lasted about 12 seconds. It went 120 feet. We have airplanes in here with longer wingspans than that. But this was the first powered flight of an airplane that was controllable. It was repeatable. It had a pilot on board. It had an engine. If you weren't doing all of those things, as Buzz Lightyear would say in the Toy Story movies, you were falling with style. You weren't flying. You had to do all this in order to fly. So the Wright brothers were the first to do that. And many, many people around the world and around the United States were competing with the Wright brothers, unbeknownst to each other, to be the first to fly an airplane. One of those people was the third secretary of our own Smithsonian, Samuel P. Langley. If you're familiar with the Langley Air Force Base, the Langley Flight Center, the Langley Science Center in Norfolk, Virginia, all named after Samuel Pierpont Langley. And he built this grand aerodrome, as he called it, in order to be the first to fly. 9 days, literally 9 days before the Wright brothers' successful flight, on a houseboat on the Potomac River, Langley attempted to fly this airplane. The houseboat and the catapult were 30 feet off the water. He had a young pilot named Charles Manley who sat in this little canoe here. He was his pilot. It had an engine. Manley actually built the engine. He was a young college student from upstate New York. I actually have a picture of this aircraft on the houseboat. Here we go. This is Langley's Aerodrome on the houseboat on the Potomac River, not far from downtown Washington, D.C., where the Anacostia River and the Potomac merge. So we're talking December 8th, 1903. They attempt to launch this off the houseboat with a catapult. The catapult crushes the airplane and dumps it, and Manley, into the icy Potomac River. Manley survives the accident. I'm told he never flew an airplane for the rest of his life. You blame him? I don't blame him. Langley was devastated by the failure. He had spent $50,000 of United States government money to build this airplane, and it failed miserably. Actually, he tried twice. Both were failures. How is it? Two boys living in Dayton, Ohio with their father and their younger sister, never technically graduated from high school, operating a bicycle shop, can figure out the secret of aviation when so many other people fail? It's a rhetorical question. If you follow me around the corner, I'll show you a Wright brothers airplane and I'll try and explain their genius.